In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the U.S. Supreme Court upholds President Trump's travel ban, giving him a legal and political victory on a controversy that helped define his presidency. We will hear from a tech leader speaking out against the decision, Airbnb's Chris Lehane. Plus, a judge has ruled Uber can operate in London with a 15-month probationary license. We're going to discuss how the ride-hailing service walked regulators back from the brink. And a group of Facebook investors want to limit Mark Zuckerberg's power over the company and step aside as chairman. Why we are hearing more pushback from shareholders despite the stock rise. But first, to our top story. The United States Supreme Court has voted to uphold President Trump's travel ban. The court voted 5-4 along party lines, rejecting arguments that Trump had exceeded his authority and violated the Constitution by targeting Muslims. The current version of the travel ban targets visitors from 7 different countries, 5 of them predominantly Muslim, and indefinitely bars more than 150 million people from entering the United States. Following the ruling, the president took to Twitter saying, "Supreme Court upholds Trump travel ban? Wow." For more, let's get to our Supreme Court reporter. Bloomberg's Greg Storr covers the court for us and is standing by. Greg, is there any other way to look at this than as a massive victory for President Trump?
No, it's definitely a massive victory. It's exactly the victory he wanted. The court said both that he was abiding by the federal immigration laws and that he didn't violate the constitutional provision that prohibits discrimination on the basis of religion. Narrow win in terms of the vote, 5-4, but big in terms of the result.
So Facebook, Google, Amazon, we're going to be talking to Chris Lehane of Airbnb momentarily. All of these are tech companies that urged the court to strike this ban down. What does it mean for them?
Yeah, so it's obviously not good news for them. It's not what they wanted. Their argument was that we depend on, first of all, certainty. We depend on people being able to come to and from countries with relative ease because we're international businesses. And we're worried that this travel ban will provide incentives for people to take their investment dollars overseas. So they say it's just not going to be good for U.S. business. It may not have a major direct impact on particular companies, but it is certainly contributing to a climate that Silicon Valley companies and other high-tech companies say is not healthy for them.
How should we view this victory in the midst of the backlash to, the family separation policies, despite the executive order that the president signed and the continuing drama about what happens to these children at the border?
Yeah, so at least when you look at the words of the opinion, it's not about the family separation policy. This was a decision that construed the authority given in the immigration laws for the president to say, I need to keep a certain class of people out for the sake of national security. And the court said the president has pretty broad authority there. The family separation issue is a different one, and certainly civil rights groups are trying to stress today that nothing in this ruling should give a green light, that's their words, a green light to the president on any other aspect of immigration policy.
All right, Bloomberg's Greg Storr for us, who covers the Supreme Court. Thank you so much for sharing that update. Now, tech, as I mentioned, pushed back big time on the travel ban the first time around and is back again. Among the first to react, Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky tweeting, "Travel ban was wrong from the beginning, still wrong today." Airbnb's co-founders released a statement saying, "We are profoundly disappointed by the Supreme Court's decision to uphold the travel ban, a policy that goes against our mission and values. To restrict travel based on a person's nationality or religion is wrong. We believe that travel is a transformative and powerful experience, and we will continue to open doors and build bridges between cultures around the world." Chris Lehane joins us now. He is the head of global policy and communications for Airbnb and a former White House official in the Clinton administration. So you worked in the White House under President Clinton. You became a tech exec. In your position as a tech executive, what is your reaction to this?
Yeah, well, I think, what Brian tweeted, our CEO and our founders have talked about, really is getting specifically at what our concern is. And this is just based on our philosophical values. if you look at the history of the United States, core and fundamental to our history has been the sense of travel. Travel has always advanced the human condition. And we're now in a time period where you're having travel bans, controversies about children being separated from their parents, conversations about building walls. And that is fundamentally inconsistent with what it means to be American, about the American experience, about American democracy. And if you look at the course of human history, right, whether it's migration, whether it's immigration, whether it's exploration, whether it's innovation, travel has always been at the center of that. And so we do think this is really a fundamental question about whether we want to continue to move forward as a country or whether we want to go backwards. And so for us, this really doesn't involve our business from a dollars and cents perspective, but really involves our values. And I can't help but think that on this day, 55 years ago, in what was then West Berlin, President John F. Kennedy gave his memorable speech about tearing down walls. And today you have this Supreme Court ruling, the Statue of Liberty is crying.
You also had quite a strong statement about the family separations. The co-founders of AIRBNB said ripping children from the arms of their parents is heartless, cruel, immoral, and counter to the American values of belonging. The U.S. government needs to stop this injustice and reunite these families. We are a better country than this. You're matching donations to the International Refugee Assistance Project. You've been hosting guests, actually, as part of your refugee program. How many people have you hosted as a result of that?
So we've been on this for several years now, really beginning at the end of 2016. We did an ad around the Super Bowl, made a series of commitments, including the housing, 100,000 displaced people, I think well over 11,000 at this point, contributed $4 million to help support refugee efforts. Today, we're announcing that matching program with the International Refugee Assistance Project. And so, for us, it's not only about speaking up and standing up, it's also about, putting action behind it. We are a community-based platform. You know this. We have 5 million plus listings around the world, and we work with our host community to help open up homes for people who are displaced. And we're going to have more to say about this, as we go forward, because again, for us, this is a values-based issue. But to the extent that you even want to talk about it from a business perspective, I mean, think about what's happened, in this country over the last year, right? You've seen travel go down. Travel's 10% of our global GDP, similar in the United States. Here's 100 million jobs that are going to be attached to travel over the next 10 years. And these types of decisions are just fundamentally not good for the U.S. from an economic perspective. Again, for us, I really want to underscore, we've continued to grow, even as the rest of the travel industry has been impacted by this in the U.S. So for us, it's not a business, it's a values. But I've actually referred to some of these decisions as travel tariffs. Right. Right? Once you start to impact travel, you're impacting a significant economic sector in the U.S., and that's just not big companies, right? That's just restaurants that depend on it. That's the small businesses that depend on it. We're speaking out about this, and we have been speaking out about it. We talked about it over when the comments were made about the various countries. I won't use the word that was used when the initial travel ban was announced, when other issues have come up, such as the separation of the parents and children at the border. So we're going to continue to talk about it. It's germane and material to what we stand for from a values perspective, but there are obviously business issues out there.
Right, and it does impact your business if travel is down. I mean, how has travel, from Airbnb's perspective, been impacted not just by the travel ban, but by the American first mentality and President Trump's general anti-immigrant stance?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. So if you look at, and other travel groups have put out this information, that travel to the U.S. over the last year from international origins has gone down. We've been very fortunate in that we've actually seen our travel from those international origins go up. We think in part that is somewhat reflective of the fact that people are actually coming to stay with other real people. And so in some ways, our model actually works for those folks who want to come and spend time with real people. But yes, overall, when you're out there putting out travel tariffs and travel bans, that's certainly not going to be good for that particular economic sector. But for us, I think this really implicates a much bigger issue, and that is this question of whether we're going to have an open world or a closed world. Right? We face enormous global challenges: climate change, economic inequality, conflict from all sorts of forms. Right? The only way those issues are addressed in a global economy and in a global context is with countries working with one another, and that requires a mindset of an open world. Right? Isolationism to tribalism, it's pretty clear that has never worked, and it's not going to work.
Do you worry about being so closely aligned with Democrats from the perspective of your business, but also some of your employees who may be Republican, who may sympathize with the president's policies?
Well, for us, right, we speak out on issues that go to our values. Travel is inherent to our values. We don't look at this as a DR, Democratic, Republican issue. I think people know where I come from philosophically, but we as a company look at this really as a question of moving forwards or moving backwards. That's the prism that we're using. We don't speak out on every single issue that takes place out there, but we do speak out on those issues that go specifically to our values. And at the center of what Airbnb is all about, it is a sense of belonging, of driving belonging, of promoting belonging, of having people stay with different people from different backgrounds. And so when you get rulings like this, those are just entirely inconsistent with what we're all about.
But surely there are people who work at Airbnb that might disagree.
I think that anyone who works at Airbnb has signed up to support and promote belonging. That is it's one of our core values. We actually have a core value that talks about the power of belonging, the transformative impact of travel. And so when you come to work at Airbnb, you're coming to support a community that is committed to driving belonging. And I think people understand that when issues come up that are going to be inconsistent with that, whether it's here in the US or in other parts of the world, we're going to stand up for the issues and values that our community cares about.
Now that this has happened, is there anything that you're doing behind the scenes on the business side to adapt?
Yeah, well, we're certainly going to be releasing some more information today. In fact, we're going to be releasing a video in a very short time period that actually is going to communicate how strongly we feel about the power of belonging, the power of travel, how important it has been to the American experience and American democracy. And we're going to continue to work on some of the things that we've been out there on, right? We've today announced that we're going to do a matching fund to IRAP, the International Refugee Assistance Program. We're going to continue to find ways to house people who've been displaced. Because again, this all tracks back and rolls back to our values and our purpose and our mission to drive belonging. And so we've spoken out on this. We've consistently spoken out again on it. When this issue pops up, we feel it's our obligation and responsibility to talk about it, and we're going to continue to do that.
All right. Airbnb's Chris Lehane.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
By.
Thanks as always.
All right. President Trump says he favors using a U.S. committee that scrutinizes foreign acquisitions of American companies to limit Chinese investments in sensitive American technologies. Trump's remarks appeared to align him with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin in an internal administration debate over how to curb Chinese acquisition of U.S. intellectual property.
We have the greatest technology in the world. People copy it and they steal it. But we have the great scientists, we have the great brains, and we have to protect that. And we're going to protect it. And that's what we were doing. And that can be done through CFIUS. We have a lot of things we can do it through.
Coming up, Uber gets a second chance in London. The details of the ride-sharing service's 15-month license to operate in the city. Next, this is Bloomberg. Uber was given a 15-month license to operate in London by a judge after working out most of its differences with regulators. The ruling came after 1.5 days of arguments in which lawyers for Uber insisted the global ride-sharing app had completely overhauled its culture, passenger safety policies, and reset its testy relationship with the regulator. In London, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde is standing by with Bloomberg Tech's Nate Langston, who has all the details on this decision. And of course, Caroline, 15 months is a lot shorter than the 5 years that Uber was hoping for.
And Emily, shorter than the 18 months they were applying for. Nate, talk to us about this, because it's sort of a probation period, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. They've got 15 months now to basically make good or continue making good on a lot of the promises that they've said they're going to make, you know, behaving a little better and, you know, reporting crimes and offering, you know, a bunch of other changes that TfL now actually has said, yeah, we're kind of happy. So it's this 15-month period that they've just got to keep going, keep doing the right thing, and then eventually reapply for another license in 15 months' time, and hopefully they'll get that without having to go to court.
I mean, you did some fantastic reporting by getting into an awful lot of Ubers, and generally the consensus was the drivers certainly like the product and they want to keep the flexibility. Exactly.
You know, the number one piece of feedback that I had is that, yes, having benefits would be very, very nice, thank you very much, but it's all about the flexibility. You know, they're not competing with the black cabs that we have here in the city, because they are competing with minicabs, you know, the kind of private hire license, and this is a change for them to be their own boss and work whenever they want. So that's the number one thing they want to keep.
It's notable for Uber, though, that this doesn't end the legal battles that are in the UK, because when it comes to the drivers, there's still some hurdles they're going to have to jump in terms of giving them not just the insurance packages they already have, but more worker benefits.
Potentially, yeah. This is battle 1 of 2 for this year, and battle 2 will be in October, when they'll be in court over employment. So Uber lost an appeal about employment rights and holiday pay, vacation pay, things like that. And we very recently had another company operating in the gig economy with plumbing, so a little different to ride-hailing. It was a company called Pimlico Plumbers, and they lost a case, and one of their workers was given the right to vacation pay. And so, you know, it's one of the first times we've ever seen anything like that. And, you know, Uber's going to have to go into court knowing that some other company with a set of workers very similar to theirs has been told that he can have vacation pay.
So does this sort of undermine the business model going forward, or is Uber here to stay, their number one market in Europe, in London, and really this is a takeaway of good news for Dara Khosrowshahi?
I think that, you know, for Uber, having to pay for things like insurance, even vacation pay, it's a lot less expensive than it would be to pull out of London. You know, London is the biggest market in Europe and one of its biggest worldwide. And so, you know, for Uber, it's a no-brainer. You know, it has to do what it needs to do to stay here. And if it has to pay, you know, vacation pay, then I have no doubt that it will do. And at the same time, Uber doesn't really have a direct rival here. You know, in the US, there's kind of the twins of Uber and Lyft, but we don't have that. You know, some people say it's Uber and the black cabs, but they're actually very, very different business models, and they serve quite a different audience, or type of passenger rather. So, you know, Uber probably needs to sort out the legal battles first, but it also needs some competition here.
So victory for Dara for now, but we'll see what competitors are eyeing up the space.
That's the one.
Nate, great reporting as ever. He's got plenty of news all coming out on this. Look out for his articles on Bloomberg. Emily.
We will. Caroline Hyde in London. Thanks so much with Nate Langston. On tomorrow's show, I will be talking about Uber's court ruling in London with Tony West, Chief Legal Officer at Uber. Coming up, investors holding about $3 billion worth of Facebook stock are making moves to remove Mark Zuckerberg as chairman. We're going to hear from an activist investor leading the charge next. This is Bloomberg. In the wake of the Cambridge Analytica data scandal, Facebook is under pressure from shareholders to be more transparent. Now, investors holding about $3 billion worth of shares want him to step aside as chair. My next guest attended Facebook's last shareholder meeting and says the governance structure is failing at the company and that there's a lack of accountability to investors. Natasha Lamb, Managing Partner Director of Equity Research and Shareholder Engagement at Arjuna Capital, joins us now from Boston. So, Natasha, walk us through what you want. Essentially, it is for Zuckerberg to step down as chair, replace himself with an independent executive, and also make some changes to the share structure.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we heard at the annual meeting a call for change. Unfortunately, the way that the share structure is currently set, that's almost impossible. And in order to effect corporate governance change at Facebook, it would really be a voluntary effort on the part of Mark Zuckerberg, who has taken a lot of investor capital. He now only owns 14% of the company, but he controls over 50% of the vote. And insiders at the firm control nearly 60%.
That said, folks like Sheryl Sandberg, who I sat down with several weeks ago, reiterated their support for his leadership. Take a listen to what Sandberg told me.
I believe deeply in Mark. Mark had a vision for what social services and social sharing could be, and that vision remains really important. Mark also, along with me and all of us, take full responsibility for what's happening here.
On top of that, Facebook already has 7 independent directors on the board. Why is that not enough?
Well, I think that there's a difference between vision and good corporate governance. And what we've seen at Facebook, it's really a cautionary tale on how not to structure corporate power. And at this point, there has been scandal after scandal. I'll give you an example of our engagement with the company. First on, gender pay equity, which we've engaged with them for over 3 years on. It's surprising to me that of the 10 tech companies that we've engaged, Facebook is the only one not to publish the data that we've been asking for, particularly in light of Sandberg's, position on women. And then the second engagement that we've had with them has been on fake news and election interference, and really what we're calling now content governance, abuse of the platform that is really in violation of the company's own terms of service. And we brought this to the fore last year at the company's annual meeting following revelations during the U.S. presidential election that top news stories that were getting traction were not mainstream legitimate news stories, but fake news stories. Our proposal went to a vote at the meeting last year. The board recommended a vote against it. It only got 2%. And, fast forward 6 months, and we heard before Congress from Facebook as well as Google and Twitter about the 126 million Americans that viewed Russian propaganda in the lead up to the election. And then fast forward another 4 months, and Cambridge Analytica.
Facebook shares, despite all of these scandals and controversy, are up. So, is this really in the best interest of shareholders if shareholders are getting their money?
Well, what we found is that the risk is not gone. So when the Cambridge Analytica scandal hit, which was not just about consumer privacy and trust, but about people taking data and using it to manipulate users for political gain, what we saw following that was a $100 billion fall in shareholder value. And that indicates that when these crises hit, the market is going to respond. Obviously, at this point, Facebook is holding almost a monopoly type position in this kind of social networking, including Instagram. And I think what has really opened up over the last year, given so many fumbles on the part of Facebook's management, is that there's an invitation for more competition. As shareholders, we want the company to be protecting their share and addressing these risks in a proactive way.
Well, we will be following to see if Facebook responds to your proposal. Natasha Lamb at Arjuna Capital, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, travel ban fallout. Now that the Supreme Court has weighed in, is there any legal recourse for those who oppose the ban, including here in Silicon Valley? That's next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Back to our top story. The U.S. Supreme Court voting 5-4 to uphold President Trump's travel ban, effectively banning 150 million people from 7 countries from entering the United States. President Trump originally tweeted a shocked wow in response to the ruling and then hailed it as a tremendous victory during a White House meeting with senators.
We just have to know who's coming here. The ruling shows that all of the attacks from the media and the Democrat politicians are wrong, and they turned out to be very wrong. And what we're looking for as Republicans, I can tell you, is strong borders, no crime.
For more, I want to get straight to Washington, where Joshua Geltzer is standing by. He is a visiting professor of law at Georgetown University and was a signatory to an amicus brief about the travel ban, along with 51 other national security and foreign policy leaders. He was also a former clerk for Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, who was a dissenting voice on Tuesday's ruling, and a former counsel at the Department of Justice. So, Joshua, given your background here, what's your reaction to this today?
Well, today's decision in and of itself is a disappointing one for those of us who think that this travel ban in all 3 of its incarnations violates both the statute and the Constitution. But I think you need to look at it in the context of a 17-month saga, going back to the very first ban being issued by Trump a week into his presidency. And there, over those 17 months, you see courts scrutinizing what the president did, asking tough questions of his lawyers, forcing the president, by his own admission, to revise multiple times the ban. And ultimately, even if I disagree with where the Supreme Court landed today, you see the rule of law standing up as manifested by our federal courts.
For the people who oppose this, is there any legal recourse?
Yes, this case may not be over yet. All of the justices acknowledge that this case can continue in the lower courts. This was here on something of a preliminary posture, even if 17 months in doesn't feel preliminary. But the case can at least conceivably continue in the lower courts. One thing that some of the challengers might want to pick up on there is the acknowledgement by the Chief Justice in his majority opinion for 5 justices that the emergency authority relied on here by the president is inherently temporary. Now, the majority of the court wasn't willing to find this ban unlawful because it lacked a particular expiration date. But if it needs to be temporary, there is the question of how long can it be on the books for?
Now, a number of tech executives rallied to fund another organization where you are executive director, the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection, which offers a legal SWAT team of sorts to people in situations of extreme instability, potentially when a travel ban is implemented. How helpful have these tech folks been? How much have you raised, and how much have they helped you raise for this organization?
We are extremely grateful at ICAP for the support we've received. We began to build some support early in 2017. We launched in August of 2017, so we're just coming up on our first birthday. And in that time, we've sued some of the groups that showed up in Charlottesville last August as part of the Unite the Right rally there, trying to curb the violence that the country witnessed there. We've defended sanctuary cities in Indiana. We've attacked anti-sanctuary city laws in Texas and elsewhere. So having the support to find the constitutional issues of the day, press on the right cases, and continue to use the courts as a check on the executive or on others who would act outside the law strikes us as a very valuable contribution to be making, especially in these times. And we're grateful for the opportunity to be making that contribution.
So are you seeing cases of folks, immigrants, travelers, who may be caught in the dragnet here? And can you give us any color on what they're experiencing?
I think that's what we may be seeing in the coming days and weeks. Of course, this challenge was writ large to the policy as written, but part of what may follow in the wake of today's ruling are narrower challenges, perhaps individuals who feel that they particularly have a stronger case. You also will see, and this may or may not be challengeable in court, but it's still important, I think you'll see a pressing on the waivers that are purportedly available even under this ban. You saw some of the justices today express concern that those waivers were not really available to those who might qualify for them, and I think that deserves scrutiny going forward.
So, Silicon Valley and several tech companies and CEOs have largely opposed the travel ban. We had Airbnb on the show earlier. They're offering services to refugees. What can companies do?
It seems like legal services are a big one. And, of course, that's partly where we fit in, but we are small, and there are lots of folks who need legal services these days. So to provide support for that, to provide a sense of what is available, even to share information. That's part of what Justice Breyer, in particular, at oral argument in this case back in April, pressed the government on. For those who qualify for a waiver, do they know it's available? Do they know they qualify? Do they know how to pursue it if they do qualify? And companies can be valuable in sharing information about how to at least make the most of what's available here.
Might we see retaliatory measures from countries targeted by this ban?
I don't know. I used to work on counterterrorism issues in government and information sharing in particular, and it has long struck me in the course of this saga that banning a country's nationals from entering our country is hardly a good way to increase cooperation and enhance intelligence sharing. Now, whether countries will react the way Chad, for example, reacted when it was first placed on the ban by pulling some of its troops out of the counterterrorism fight in West Africa against a group called Boko Haram, remains to be seen. But this still strikes me as an unfortunate approach. And that's one thing, of course, the court doesn't speak to. It tells the country whether something is lawful or unlawful, but not whether it's a good idea. And a lot of us who've worked on counterterrorism still think that what the president has pursued here is really not a good idea.
So do you imagine there is new activity in cyberspace right now?
In terms of reacting to this decision?
Right.
I do think you'll see folks who are unhappy with it and certainly talking about it, but whether in fact you see retaliation, it's so hard to know. Of course, even if I'm disappointed in this result, it's the rule of law in action, and I think the right place to respond is in the courts, whether it's the challengers here continuing their challenge in the lower court, as the Supreme Court at least acknowledged was a possibility today, or whether it's others bringing their own challenges. That seems to be the place to pick up on this for those who want to keep pressing and keep challenging what the executive has done here. All
right, Joshua Geltzer, visiting professor at Georgetown Law. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, Andreessen Horowitz has hired its first female general partner. The venture capital giant has tapped Katie Haun, who will be a leader of the firm's newly formed $300 million cryptocurrency fund. Haun is a former federal prosecutor who currently sits on the boards of Coinbase and HackerOne. Her appointment is the latest in VC firms' attempts to add more sorely needed female talent. Earlier this year, Bain Ventures added its first female partner. Greylock added its second after its first left the firm. Coming up, the future of AI, how humans and machines can work together to build the future. We are going to hear from one person who just testified before Congress on this issue, what he is telling Washington next. This is Bloomberg. Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Shiller weighed in on Bitcoin, calling the cryptocurrency an epidemic of enthusiasm. He spoke to Bloomberg's Tom Keene about why he is skeptical about all the interest in the market.
The East Coast is less into it than the West Coast. Silicon Valley is really into it. This, to me, shows that this is not a rational response to new information. It's a social movement. It's an epidemic of enthusiasm. Very much. It is a speculative bubble.
Bitcoin dropped below $6,000 for the first time since February over the weekend. The largest cryptocurrency has tumbled this year as regulators spanning the globe step up scrutiny of what critics say is a vehicle for fraud. Well, with great power comes great responsibility. Yes, that is the iconic line uttered by Spider-Man. But on Tuesday, it was also the title of a congressional hearing on the future of artificial intelligence. This hearing comes at a time when a Pew survey finds that a quarter of U.S. adults are very worried that robots and computers could replace them in their jobs. Nearly another 50% are somewhat worried about the same thing. My next guest testified at this congressional hearing. He is the CTO and co-founder of OpenAI, a nonprofit artificial intelligence research company that includes Elon Musk as one of its co-founders. Its mission? To ensure that AI can coexist with humanity. And most recently, it has been creating AI bots that can compete against humans in esports gaming. Greg Brockman, welcome to the show. We're going to get to video games in a moment. But first, I want to talk about what you are telling Congress. Are we headed for that apocalyptic future that Elon Musk, your co-founder, has warned about with the coming of AI? Or are those concerns overblown, like Mark Zuckerberg says?
Well, thank you for having me. So the statements that we made to Congress and the thing that we want to communicate is that the field is moving very fast, a lot faster than people realize, that we're starting to be able to build faster and faster computers at a rate that is a lot faster than anything we've seen. And so we don't know 5 years from now what we will be capable of building. And so the question of exactly where it goes, how powerful these systems become, I think right now we're in a fog, and we're going to be in that fog until we see through the power of the computers we're currently building.
Now, you are working hard on this on the nonprofit side. What should the government's role in AI be?
So the very first place to start is to understand what's happening. So we actually recently did a study to look at the growth of computation in the field and found that the amount of compute thrown at the largest AI systems has been growing at a rate of doubling every 3.5 months for the past 6 years. That's a total growth of 300,000 times. And we project the same thing for the next 5 years, which means that, to put that in perspective, it would be like if your phone battery went from having 1 day of battery life to having 800 years of battery life, and then 5 years from now had 100 million years worth of battery life. And so the government, I think, is well positioned to really understand rapid change like this, to be able to set the goalpost of understand what's coming, what's happening, what we're able to do, and what we're not. And I think if you don't know what's happening, it's going to be hard to enact good regulation and ensure that there's a good outcome.
Now, you are trying to demonstrate what AI can accomplish, and you are about to go on a big trip to Canada to participate in a big video game competition along with some AI bots that have been, funded by Elon Musk, and to prove essentially that a bot can be the best video gamer. Talk to us about what you've accomplished here.
Well, so the thing that we've been working on is playing the complex strategy game Dota 2. And this is a milestone. Solving complex strategy games is a milestone that we, Google's company DeepMind, and Facebook have all been working towards. Because unlike board games like chess or Go, these strategy games start to capture these complex aspects of the real world. You need to be able to strategize over this very continuous time. And that what we've been able to do is show that today's algorithms, if you scale them up with massive amounts of computation, are capable of going far further than even the experts in the field thought.
So, talk to us a little bit about what you think AI will be able to accomplish in 5 years and then in 50 years.
Well, so the things that we look at is we look at what's being done today. And so today we're able to build systems that are able to plan and reason over these long time horizons, that are able to operate in these very complex environments, something very different from what we've seen before. And so you start to think about potential applications for that, where that goes. That applications like elderly care robots is a perfect example, where you should be able to start building systems that can be deployed in the real world, helping real people, that are able to navigate and operate in these very critical, very high responsibility areas. That we think that one important milestone in the next 5 years is definitely going to be new scientific discovery, whether it's drug discovery or proving mathematical theorems that are outside of human reach. Now, if you fast forward to, as you said, 50 years, the question of what can we build then, right now it's very hard for us to put a limit on that. It's really hard for us to understand what that looks like. In the same way that if in the 1950s we were to think about what's the internet going to be, how's that going to affect us, I think our answers would have been pretty poor. And so the perspective that OpenAI has is that if you look at where this technology has the potential to go, that you could truly build an artificial general intelligence, a system that's at human level across a wide range of tasks. And how will we relate to that? How do we ensure that that world is one that's good for humans? That is the fundamental premise of OpenAI.
Now, we've heard vastly different estimations of how many jobs will be impacted or eliminated. Some folks saying it's just 10% of jobs, some folks saying it's going to be low-income jobs. How do we know that AI isn't going to increase income inequality and make society worse?
Yep. So I think that with AI, that there's so much potential benefit, but there's also some real risks and downsides. And I think that for technologies in general, the question of how do they affect things in the short term, I think that people always sort of overestimate how much impact they're going to have immediately, but underestimate the long-term impact. And I think the same will be true here. And so, one fear that OpenAI has, one of our real core mission is ensuring that the benefits of this technology don't get locked up with one entity, with one organization, with one set of people, that they should be distributed to the world. And I think that that is something that's really important, and I think that that's something that I hope lots of other developers of this potential kind of technology also take to heart.
How involved has Elon Musk been? How helpful has he been? And what does he want here?
So Elon was a critical person to helping get this organization started, and still involved as a donor, and is someone who I think that his he's been talking about AI, the importance of it, and how important it is to get it right for a very long time. And so I think that his interests are very, very aligned with the work that we're doing.
Greg Brockman, co-founder and CTO of OpenAI, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Amazon is stepping further into financial services, announcing it is pairing up with American Express on a credit card for small business customers. Amazon hopes to supply small companies with everything from office supplies to factory parts. Last year, it started a Prime membership program offering fast, free delivery for businesses. For the past 7 years, it has used data from 2 million merchants to offer loans to small businesses, which use the credit to buy more inventory or expand their businesses with new products. Coming up, could a border wall benefit from technology? We're going to dip into the possibilities from the border of Texas next. This is Bloomberg. The Trump administration is under fire for its policy that separates parents trying to cross the southern U.S. border from their children. The issue has ignited nationwide protests and is not only putting pressure on Republicans, but broadening the conversation on the idea of a wall. But could technology be used to enhance our security instead. Bloomberg News White House reporter Jen Epstein is in Brownsville, Texas, at the border with more. And Jennifer, many tech solutions that have been tried at the border have failed. A lot of money has been poured into it. But, now that you're down there, is there any more optimism around technology could be used as a tool here?
We've certainly heard a lot from members of Congress who have been down here talking about ankle bracelets, and that really that they should be used more widely. They're already used quite widely to track people who are detained but then allowed to stay in the U.S. while they're awaiting legal proceedings. Certainly heard that from a group of members of Congress, Beto O'Rourke, Joaquin Castro, some other Democrats a couple of days ago in El Paso, saying, that costs a couple dollars a day, whereas keeping a child or an adult in a facility costs thousands of dollars a day per person. And, they seem to think that, there's really no question there that should be used more of, and that detention facilities should be used less.
Big tech has come out strongly against these family separations. Companies like 23andMe have offered to test the DNA of children for free to help them find their parents. At the same time, we've got backlash, against the upholding by the Supreme Court of the president's travel ban. Two very different stories, but both having to do with crossing of the United States border. Give us a sense of what you're seeing here and the reaction down there to all of these events.
Well, I think that as has been said about a lot of different things that the Trump administration has done, tech wants to show that it does not fully support the president's views, especially on immigration, whether it is, having to do with people from Muslim countries, or if it is having to do with these people coming from Central America and family separations. What 23andMe has offered, and I believe another company has done the same thing, is to offer DNA testing to help families reunite, especially with younger children who may not know their parents' names, who may not have any information, whose information, identifiers, or a letter in their pocket or something may have gotten lost. But so far, we've heard from some advocacy groups that are rejecting that. There's a group called RISIS that's based here in Texas, and they're really active here, and they are saying that that's not something that they would want to see because of the potential for that information, once it's collected, to be abused in some way. They're saying, these people, a lot of these people came in here to the U.S. looking for asylum, and they may be under threat of some kind, and for governments to have information could be dangerous.
All right, Jennifer Epstein reporting for Bloomberg at the border. Thank you so much for weighing in. Well, Silicon Valley is no longer the undisputed king of the venture capital world. The number of deals has surged over the last year in Asia. Total investments by Chinese VCs and private equity firms topped 1 trillion yuan in 2017. That is over 150 billion US dollars. One of China's largest angel investors has played a big part in that, having funded nearly a dozen billion-dollar companies since 2010. As part of our Venture China series, Genfund CEO Anna Fang spoke to Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie in Beijing about the changing landscape of investing in the region.
Maybe 7 years ago when we started Genfund, it would be someone with a great idea and who was really smart. But now you're seeing people with a lot of experience, people who co-founded Meituan, or people who who were like head of Baidu Research, like these type of really senior people around 40 years old coming out to start their companies. And of course, they want more money and higher valuations given their experience. So it's people who've been in the internet industry for 10 plus years that are coming out. So that feels very different to me.
Do you think Silicon Valley has been slow to wake up to what's happening in China when it comes to technology, and particularly the funds that are available?
I think that they were slow, a few years ago, but this year I've definitely seen a turn in interest about Chinese companies because they've witnessed the growth. And Silicon Valley hasn't seen that much in terms of consumer innovation, I think, in a while. And you also had Mike Morris's sort of letter earlier, I think it was this year. So I think Silicon Valley, there's a lot of interest in people wanting to come see Chinese companies, trying to understand the momentum. Certainly a lot of investors in the US are very excited about what's happening in tech in China. I mean, the companies here are growing much faster than a lot of US companies.
And in terms of the broader Made in China 2025 strategy, how closely do you align your strategy, your decision making around that policy initiative?
So that one's less policy for us, but I think I very much agree with that story. In fact, I think it's going to be sooner than 2025. I think it's by 2020, I really think we'll see a lot more global companies that are Chinese in the tech sector. You see Didi already operating in many other countries and profitable in some. You saw Musical.ly and how they were one of the top social apps in the US. We have companies that are competing with Amazon in India. In Southeast Asia, especially in the fintech sector, you're seeing Chinese payments and what China experienced 10 years ago with lending sort of happening in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So there are a lot of themes that China and trends that China experienced 10 years ago that are very much mirrored in Southeast Asia.
Anna Fong there, CEO of the Gen Fund. And we will have more exclusive interviews from the Venture China series all this week. Tomorrow we're going to hear from GGV Capital's Jenny Lee. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.